range. Numbers, for comparison purposes, they have about 13 to 21 nuclear weapons. The United States has about 9,600. In other words, if a nuclear war were to break out, North Korea would cease to exist fairly quickly. I mean, that's kind of a horrible thing to think about. Most of the Korean Peninsula would be uninhabitable.
If you dropped a bomb in the middle of North Korea, would it cover, the results cover most of North Korea?
Not one bomb, but we have more than enough to do it. The U.S. has enough bombs to, last time I checked, destroy the entire Earth about 5 times over, something like that. The Russians also.
We only dropped 2. And one lady that lives where I live lived in India when she was younger, and she said even the bomb changed the sand. It was not sand like she knew sand. It had looked more like rice. So I wondered how far this would reach. If you hit the middle of it, would it reach far enough with results?
Well, here's,
knock them off?
yeah, the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima ending World War II are very small by modern standards. The latest nuclear tests that North Korea just enacted, the weapon there is about 100 times stronger. U.S. weapons are far stronger than that. So, what do you do? What do you do in a situation like this? Some of the proposals that are floating around, and have floated around since, I guess, the 1950s even. One is military. You know, out, destroy the North Korean state. China has said if we were to make such an option that China would enter the war on North Korea's behalf. So now you're fighting China, which has a lot of, not as many as Russia or the US, but still has a lot of nuclear weapons. Another military option has been what's called a limited strike. Take out North Korea's ability to make missiles and nuclear weapons. That's kind of tricky. Some of them are on mobile launchers. And oh, by the way, the minute we launch something like that, what would stop Kim from launching all those conventional artillery into Seoul and killing, 7, 8 million people? Economic, that's what we're trying now. Sanctions. Trying to put the squeeze. Trying to make life difficult. Trying to make life hard enough that the Kim regime would change its political calculus and decide it's worth it not to. So far, it has not worked. The third one is a Cold War. This one I don't hear too much about. We did it with the Soviet Union for many years. A Cold War. Mutual assured destruction. Each side knew that if they started something, their country would be destroyed. And that's another possibility, a new Cold War. Because the funny thing about nuclear weapons is, if you have them, nobody can attack you, really. But you can't use them.
Yeah.
Because if you use them, then your opponent will totally, most countries and much of the world get annihilated. So it's a strange kind of a weapon. We've never had one like this in the history of warfare, where if you have it, it gives you a great amount of defense, but you can't use it offensively. Because the payback would be destruction. So, what would you do? Any thoughts?
Have sanctions ever worked?
Do sanctions ever work? Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Depends a lot on the situation. My own analysis of Kim is that
He's crazy.
he believes his own press about being anointed, mandate of heaven, This is my country. The people are there to serve him. Okay? But I see him as brutal, fierce, loyal only to himself, somewhat unpredictable, but wanting to survive, wanting his rule to last his lifetime, and possibly his heir, wanting the dynasty to continue.
What if somebody assassinated him?
That's just what I was gonna say.
That is another military option that's been discussed. You may have picked it up. South Korea is now working with the U.S. to develop they call it a decapitation. Remove the head of state. Ideally, you just kill the head of state, hoping that the next person is a little saner. Hoping that the retaliation isn't a nuclear bomb. That it's very targeted, it's very limited. Some people say we're actually doing that. There are some folks that are saying that actually we're not really trying to do that at all. We're just trying to send a message north. Watch it. Little uncertainty there. As I said, my own analysis is Kim wants survival. Because if you remember back in the 2000s, what did we do in, 2003, if I remember correctly, in Iraq? We deposed the dictator, Saddam Hussein. We didn't wait for him to strike us. Based on a concern about nuclear weapons, we struck him first. Okay? A number of years later, what happened with the Arab Spring in Libya? We made sure that Gaddafi lost to internal insurgencies. Now, you're Kim. What do? Do you trust that the U.S. will never attack you? Or do you do something like develop IBCMs and nuclear weapons to ensure that the U.S. will not attack you? Because it's that weapon that gives you a lot of defense, a lot of retaliation, but you can't use it first. Yeah, I know you have a different view. Go for it.
Yeah, well, I don't think that survival is his objective. I think that he's first of all, he's nuts. And he is completely a loose cannon. And he wants to be known, martyred, and known as the most famous person in history since Hitler. And therefore I think that he will launch a nuclear weapon, possibly at us, or maybe more likely at Guam, or maybe Hokkaido, or someplace that would generate a nuclear response. And by doing that, he would get two advantages. One, he'd be wiped out, but that he would go down as this martyr to his demented cause, and he would also force the United States to use a nuclear weapon, and therefore, since we're the only country that ever did, and now 50 years later, or 60 or whatever it is, 70 years later, he can leave us with the legacy of being the world's worst criminal. But I don't think survival motivates him.
Okay. I see it a little differently. I see a lot of his actions within North Korea toward eliminating opposition, even his uncle. And there is some evidence the uncle was planning a plot, planning a coup. Not a lot, but there never a lot in North Korea. But there is some third-party evidence that he was planning that. He had his uncle executed. Again, we don't know how. Rumors say anti-artillery fire was used to execute him, but...
Well, what are you going to expect out of a guy who never goes to the bathroom?
He's constipated, that's why.
He's constipated, that's it.
Yeah. I get crabby when I'm like. Pastor, is it not true that any missile Korea launches in any direction is detected by one or more countries and would be blown up in the air? Is that true?
The detected part, yes. The blow up in the air part, iffy.
Intercepted, I should say,
Yeah.
you know.
If intercepted.
Yeah.
The only country I know of that has any capacity to intercept is the United States.
Oh.
But
So China and Russia, you
No.
don't have those capabilities?
not at this point. They're working to get it. And even for the US, I think we're at about a 50-50 of hitting something in the air.
Well, what about Japan? Can Japan have nuclear weapons? or
No.
not? No, that's what I thought. They're sitting there like sitting ducks.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. Okay. If you're talking about an intercontinental ballistic missile, it's got to go any real distance. It's got to go up in almost into orbit and come back down. The hard part is not shooting the thing off. The hard part is making the bomb small enough to fit in a missile, and also for it to survive re-entry. When it starts coming in, it needs a heat shield. Also, bombs are more effective if it's an airburst. Oh gosh, I never thought I'd be talking about airbursts. Anyway, where it's a few, hundreds of feet above the ground, creates a greater blast radius, causes more damage. That's tricky. Hitting one is really tricky. However, there are intermediate range missiles, short range missiles. Those we have a far higher chance of hitting. There's something called THAAD, Theater Air Defense. The Patriot system was the beginning of that. There are other systems now as well. We probably would hit 4 out of 5 that would be launched toward Japan or South Korea. And if you may have noticed in the news lately, we added to that capability in Korea. We moved some U.S. units into Korea. They're now deployed to make that anti-missile defense a little more robust.
But if you only need one to hit.
That's
So
right.
if you only get 4 out of 5, well, that's 5. Shoot 10, they'll get 2.
Yeah, and he'd shoot his entire arsenal.
You know, in Vietnam, they'd send up SAMs at us, and they'd always shoot, or they finally got onto it and started shooting 2 at once. So there'd be one right behind the other. You couldn't sell both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd think you'd dodge the first one, and the second one would get you.
Yep. Well, in Iraq, even the response to mortar attacks was during the insurgency in 2005 when I was there, was so fast that the insurgents knew they could not fire 3 mortar rounds. They'd be caught. So it's 2 in the morning, you'd hear boom, boom. You know what you did? Roll over and go back to bed. It didn't hit you. There's no sense going to a bunker. That's it for the night because they didn't have time to drop a 3rd one. So you do have that, yeah. But we don't have a whole lot of options here. Most of the people in that photo, most of the folks, whether they hate the Kims or love the Kims, are powerless to do anything. It is a total police state. Everybody rats out. Everyone's expected to rat out everybody. Children are taught in school to tell if their parents show any wavering from the party line. And it has happened. Again, you get bits and pieces from people who have successfully escaped, mainly across the Yalu River into China. There's a trickle. Of course, if you do that, your family may be in a concentration camp.
What's the border like? I mean, how tough would it be to get across the border? I mean, the border with South Korea.
Oh, the border with South Korea is the world's most fortified and mined, whoops, sorry, hit the wrong button. It's the most heavily mined and fortified border in the world. However, last year, a North Korean soldier defected. They don't know how he got across, but he did. Prevailing winds go north. Balloons are not a good idea. Tunneling underneath, it's just so wide. It's not like the Berlin Wall scenario. It's much wider. And it is the most heavily mined area. All kinds of... that's why the U.S. has never signed an international protocol banning landmines. The U.S. would have done it years ago, except for this border, feeling they've got to have that to prevent a mass march south of North Korean troops. Because, as I said, their equipment is old, their training is inferior, but they got a lot of them.
The troops that they're going to be sending over, are they going to be putting them on the border?
No.
North and south? Where are they shipping them?
Well, the troops we've sent in are mainly Army Air Defense, anti-missile. They would sit back, maybe in this area, back in here. I mean, even the Patriot unit that I was with in the 1970s in Germany, we sat on the opposite side of the inter-German border with East Germany in the last days of the Cold War. We'd be sitting here, somewhere in this area, to stop planes from coming in from North Korea. You sit 70, 80 miles back, easy.
What's the border like between North Korea and China? Is it
Okay.
fortified?
It's a river. Through here, it's the Yalu River. It's pretty mountainous up in this area, and there's, like I said, a small connection with Russia up there. Most people have tried to defect, try to get across this river. There are smugglers. There's a whole black market operation there trying to get people out. However, if the Chinese catch you right on the border, they're likely to ship you back. They do not want hundreds of thousands of refugees streaming into northern China. That's part of why they back the Kim regime. They also find the Kim regime useful. You know, we're so busy with North Korea that we are, until recently, rather ignoring the South China Sea down here. And then China is much more interested in it down here than North Korea. But it's sometimes useful to have a noisy, even a troublesome ally cause all kinds of trouble here, so everybody's looking up here and you don't see what's going on down here. Like magicians sleight of hand. The Navy does, well, I'm getting ahead, but the Navy does do freedom of the seas navigation through this area, and China's claimed almost that entire sea for itself, but more on that in 2 weeks. But China's interest basically is it does not want a U.S. ally, South Korea, with a border along the Yalu. North Korea as a buffer state is useful. North Korea as an annoyance to the United States is useful. You've got a guy here who feels he's got the mandate of heaven. They've had their own unique philosophy. I mean, if you go into Pyongyang, you will see statues and pictures and all kinds of shrines to the Kims, the two deceased Kims. I think there is one smallish, relatively smallish picture of Marx and one of Lenin in all of Pyongyang. Now, if you're truly a communist country, they're front and center. They're the heroes. They're the founders. They're the ones you emulate. But I would argue this is not a communist country in the traditional sense of the word. This is a dictatorial monarchy using a blend of Confucianism and some Shinto elements to prop itself up, to cower its citizens, to keep them in a climate of fear so that they will unquestionably follow and the dictatorship survives. That's why I think Kim's not going to fire a missile. I really don't. Not a nuclear-tipped missile with intent to hit something and destroy it. Because he knows his regime is over once he does that. And I would argue the U.S. has sufficient conventional power that we could destroy North Korea without nuclear weapons.
You know, it seems to me that China is more motivated by economics these days than ideology. And
Yep, I would
can't-
agree.
I can't picture them jumping in and really making good on a claim that they will support North Korea if push comes to shove. I just can't imagine that they would allow things to escalate to a nuclear level.
Yeah, I think that's where China's playing a balancing act. If China thought North Korea was actually going to launch a missile, I think you would find that the ruler of the Kim dynasty would suddenly die in his sleep. I think China would do it. I think China would really put the screws privately to them to stop. However, China in the past has demanded that North Korea not do certain things, and North Korea went ahead and did them anyway. So the amount of influence China has is somewhat limited. Last thing China wants is a nuclear war. And I think you're right. They're much more motivated by economics than anything else. So, you know, trade embargo with the U.S. would hurt the U.S. and it would also hurt China. It would hurt China worse. We'd feel the impact too, though. So what do you do? It's been called a situation with no good answers. Just bad ones and worse ones. Personally, I think a Cold War solution where we remind the Kim family every so often that if you start something, we will finish it. And leave it at that, much as we did with the Soviet Union. May be useful. China's official position is that if North Korea starts a conflict, they will not support North Korea. If Kim launches a missile and hits somebody, launches a nuke and kills somebody, or even conventional, China is neutral. They will not help the Kim regime. They're on their own. And the Kim regime would disappear pretty quickly then. If we start it, China has vowed to come in on the North Korean side. Now, would they? That's a risky calculation. So this is where we're at in North Korea. Strange nation with a officially atheistic society. It's got all kinds of religious elements bubbling under the surface. Where the average person believes that their leader is a demigod, if not a god. And yet, officially, they're communists and atheists. So it's an interesting contradiction that is North Korea. Any other observations, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
What is China's relationship with South Korea?
Improving. China and South Korea have increased trade by quite a bit in recent years. And the relationship is fairly good. Guarded, but good. You know, in the event of war on the Korean Peninsula, it depends on who shoots first as far as China is concerned. The minute North Korea tries something, the South is going north. I remember even in the mid-'80s, even in the 90s, being told that offhand, private opinion, one of the main reasons why we are in South Korea is to keep the South Koreans from going north. The South Korean military could destroy the North Korean military on its own. They don't need us. So again, why is Kim building a bomb? Given the intense desire of people on both sides to reunify? If China just wouldn't back North Korea at all, and North Korea did not have a nuclear capability, South Korea could reunify the peninsula. But that's not in China's interest. So you see how major powers get into this and make things difficult? Next week is Syria and Iraq. A war that could have been 3 months long, dragged out to more than that in years, mainly because of major powers being involved. Syria is interesting. It's a 3 to 6-sided civil war, depending on what day of the week it is. You've got groups that ally for a bit, and then they fight each other. And they ally with somebody else, and then they fight each other. But that's next week. Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Pastor.
Bye, Jane.